Hey guys, Davey here. Just want to take a moment to, first of all, tell every single one of you guys who have purchased and read Nothing Is Wasted the book, thank you so much. Thank you for your support. I pray that it has really ministered to your heart. And thank you for those of you guys who have purchased it for others who are going through a difficult time. We've heard so much incredible feedback about how the book is impacting people across the world. And it's just such a meaningful thing for me to know that the most vulnerable part of my story in my life is really impacting you in the most vulnerable parts of your story in your life. And so thank you so much. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I had an opportunity to be on a Zoom call during a lunch hour with a book club that was going through Nothing Is Wasted the book. And we got to talk about how going through the book together in a community of people, how much more it enhanced and amplified the impact of the book. And they were able to have some handholds and some conversations around some really big topics in their own life and begin to unravel some of the trauma that they were going through in their own life. And that is exactly why I wanted to write Nothing Is Wasted the book, so that you could see yourself in the story and you could begin to see how God was working in your story, which is why we're so incredibly excited to share with you a new resource that we have available now called the Nothing Is Wasted video series and study guide. Okay, this is a 6-session video-based study, essentially a Bible study that includes everything you need to have deep and meaningful conversations around the book Nothing Is Wasted and all of its themes: grief, loss, forgiveness, hope, and so much more. Now, when you order the Nothing Is Wasted video series and study guide, you're going to get access to the 6 short videos that you can use with your small group, with your book club, with your church, with your group of friends, whoever you're gathering around to go through this book together, maybe coworkers, whoever it may be. So you'll get those videos and you'll get the study guide that is full of not just helpful tips for organizing your group time, but also session questions, homework, Bible study, prompts, and ways to dive deeper into the material. And so this is just, I'm so excited about releasing this material out to you so you can do a deep dive into this for your own sake, but also so that you can lead other people through their healing journeys using Nothing Is Wasted the book. And we believe this series is best done in community, but you can also grab it on your own. You can just go through it yourself. It doesn't have to be done with a group. So you can pick up the video series, you can go through the Bible study yourself. And see, the reason that we're doing this is because we know each of us have stories of pain and heartache. And in those seasons, it leaves us wondering, where in the world is my redemption? Where can that be found? Where is God showing up in this? And we believe that with God, and God often uses others, there is healing available. And right now you can start to read the story, or you can help other people through it if you've already read the story of my late wife, Amanda, and what her life was like and what her character was like and her story. And as you do that, you'll begin to see yourself in these stories, and you're going to begin to realize that in your story, nothing is wasted. So you can go to nothingiswasted.com/book study, nothingiswasted.com/book study. You can pick up the Nothing Is Wasted video series and study guide right now. Go through it yourself, go through it with some friends. And I'm telling you, I can't wait to hear how God uses these stories to bring you and those in your life hope and healing. And reach out to us. If you want me to come and hang out with your book club or hang out with your small group study for an hour and answer some questions, that would be like the biggest joy of my life, to serve in that way. So pick the study guide up, pick up the video series, go through it with a group, reach out to us. I'd love to come and join you. And let's see how God will use this to bring a huge impact into the spheres of influence that you're walking in every day. Well, hello, friends. Welcome to the Nothing Is Wasted podcast. My name is Davey. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm so excited about this conversation that we have today. Tyler Staton is the lead pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland, Oregon. Many of you will be familiar with John Mark Comer. We had him on the podcast several months ago. We talked quite a bit about the dark night of the soul, and he and John Mark have worked together for some time. John Mark used to be one of the pastors at Bridgetown Church as well. And Tyler Staton is now kind of taken over the helm there, as well as is doing a lot of things like the practicing the way rhythms and lifestyle with that church, as well as he's also the national director of 24/7 Prayer USA, which is an incredible organization that really is helping to revive prayer being at the helm and the centerpiece of churches, organizations, really of our faith. And there's some incredible revival taking place with that. I've got a personal dear friend who's majorly and intricately involved with 24/7 Prayer USA. And so Tyler stays pretty busy. On top of that, he's got an incredible story because it was about 18 months ago, I believe, that he was diagnosed with cancer that was terminal, stage 4 cancer. And so he has had quite a recovery journey from that. And he just recently posted an update about his journey. And so we talk about that journey and what it's like to live every single day. And on one hand, facing this diagnosis and what is probably looking like your imminent death. And also at the same time, trusting and believing that God can that God can supernaturally intervene in your life. And this is just when you have a conversation with someone who is becoming increasingly aware of their mortality, there's another depth to it. And that's the case for this conversation. And I'll be honest with you, something about talking with someone who, I've had a couple of conversations in the history of the Nothing is Wasted podcast, talking with someone who is that near to heaven. And there is just something sweet about the communion that they have with the Lord that makes you hang on every word that they say. And it also, for me, I've lost my closest relationship that you have here on earth. I've lost my spouse. 2015, I lost my wife, Amanda. And so the veil between heaven and earth is paper thin for me. So it just feels like in this kind of a conversation, it makes that veil even thinner. And this is rich. It's rich. You're going to want to, if you're driving, don't take notes. But if you have an opportunity to sit down and actually take notes, that is definitely something you want to do. Tyler's also an author. He authored the book Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools, and Searching for Enough, the high wire walk between doubt and faith. And he's also the host of the Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools podcast. His latest book is called The Familiar Stranger, and it's reintroducing the Holy Spirit to those in search of an experiential spirituality. And I'm telling you, you're not going to want to miss a moment of this conversation. Before we dive into my conversation with Tyler Staton, I just want to remind you that if you want to get connected to Nothing is Wasted Ministries and the resources that we have so many resources on our website, nothingiswasted.com. You can go to nothingiswasted.com/start here if you're new to the ministry and if you're new to Nothing is Wasted and you want to find out what your next step is in your own journey of healing. Nothing is Wasted Ministries. We want to meet you in your pain and provide you a pathway through it, because there is a pathway through your pain. You don't have to remain stuck in the middle of the valley. And so we want to help walk with you through your valley so that you can come out of your valley a different person. That this valley doesn't shake your faith, it shapes your faith. That it doesn't define you, but it refines you. And it really propels you into the glorious purposes that God has for your life as you come through this valley. And so we want to help you with that. Nothingiswasted.com/start here will direct you to a Zoom call that I do pretty regularly, about once a month, where it's a live call. You can ask questions and answers. I'll walk you through a bit of my story and how God showed up in my story, and then also help you to begin to see God showing up in your story, and it will begin to be a catalyst for healing for you. So whether you're taking a first step or a next step, we'd love to connect with you there. Nothingiswasted.com/start here to register for the next Zoom call. That Zoom call is called 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story. 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. And I'd love to connect with you there. Okay, without further ado, let's step into my conversation with Tyler Staton. Well, Tyler, it's so great to have you on the Nothing is Wasted podcast, man. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, brother. I'm delighted to be with you.
I'd love for us to start out. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you're doing right now, and maybe connect the dots for us. We had John Mark Comer on the podcast a couple months ago, and so we learned of what you're doing and the stuff that, God's doing through you. And so we were like, man, we got to have Tyler on too and just talk about his journey. So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, and
Oh, that's
about your
cool.
family.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that that's how this came about, but um, yeah, I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm married to Kirsten, who is the most incredibly strong woman and the most fun person that I know to be around. I'm delighted every day that somehow I charmed her into this arrangement, into this lifelong covenant that she's locked into now. And I've got three little boys, Hank, Simon, and Amos, who are 8, 6, and 2. And I get to pastor a church called Bridgetown here in Portland, right in the heart of the city. Get to lead an amazing team of pastors and just pastor an incredibly vibrant and mature community who carries humility really beautifully. And I thank God regularly for that. I'm also the national director of 24/7 Prayer, which is a prayer movement in over 120 nations around the world. And I get to create content and resources and things like that and kind of set vision for a whole bunch of churches across the US through that, under that umbrella. And I've gotten to write a few books. And so that's a great joy of mine as well to get to put pen to paper, mainly because most of the people who have shaped me most deeply in my faith are no longer living. And to think that I just might be able to help someone, a few generations down the line from me is really enlivening about the craft of writing in particular. So that's who I am. That's who I get to work on. That's who I get to hang out with. And I cannot believe that I get to do these things and call it work.
Wow. Wow. It's amazing, man. The things I'm really curious what you would say. I'm sure that we could have an entire conversation about this for well over an hour, but you described Bridgetown as a very thriving, very vibrant, very healthy, very mature community. And we work with churches all over the country. There'd be a lot of churches that they would describe themselves as things, but a lot of them can't describe themselves as that. Maybe they're growing, maybe they're alive, maybe they're moving and shaking, but as far as mature and healthy, what do you think was and has been really the key to that?
I mean, I think there's probably two ways to answer it depending on who you're talking to. If I was talking to any random person who stopped me on the street, I think I would say people. There's just been amazing people who
Mm,
have come along and embedded themselves into our church. And there's a lot that like someone in a shepherding role in a community like me can do to guide the flock. But ultimately, at the end of the day, uh, what I can't control is how much do these people want to be led? How
mm,
hungry are they for more of Jesus? How seriously do they want to be in throwing off every hindrance to go after him? And I would say never in my life have I gotten to be a part of a community that is so serious about desiring to throw off every hindrance and radically follow Jesus, and so convinced, just like the general waterline of our community, I think, is the majority of people are convinced that the way of Jesus really is life and life to the full.
mm,
And that means that the way of me is fundamentally at odds with that in
yeah,
ways that I will increasingly discover over the course of my life, and that
mm,
life is found in stripping myself of that and taking on more and more of Christ. And so I think that's just, who the people happen to be that have embedded themselves in this church. And then structurally or pastorally, I would say if I had to boil down and say, like, what is the best gift this community could offer to another church, I would say structurally we're a big church for the city that we're in.
mm,
We would be a tiny church in many places in America.
yeah,
But we're a big church for the city of Portland, but we operate
yeah,
like a small church. it is incredibly high value in our church that we gather around a stage on Sundays and around tables midweek.
Mm.
And a very high percentage of our church is deeply committed to Bridgetown Communities, which is our small group structure that doesn't just gather weekly to discuss sermons, but actually gathers weekly to engage spiritual practices by which we work the revelation from Sunday into our bones and our muscles and our lives,
Mm.
uh, kind of more of a holistic approach to formation. And so I think just uh, the day that we grow too broad and kind of lose that focus on like this is the thing that we do and the thing that we can offer and where we're the tip of the spear here, we'll probably lose a lot of the magic. And
Mm.
so we try to keep operating like a small church as we grow. And I would say structurally that's been the thing that's maintained the heart.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's the thing that I think you guys have a bit of notoriety around too. What distinguishes you as a community is this idea that you've been talking about with spiritual practices, spiritual discipline, spiritual rhythms, whatever you want to call it, but just the emphasis around those. Obviously starting with the whole practicing the way movement, that being really embedded into Bridgetown, but then also this is something that you've continued to carry through, that the entire community has continued to carry through as the thread that really becomes the foundation for this church. And I think it's really important because the more that I look at like the landscape of the Big C church and I see evangelical Christians who are quote unquote following after Jesus, that it doesn't seem like that there is a whole lot of the actually following after Jesus, taking up your cross, doing exactly what you just said, that my way, my agenda, my desires are at odds fundamentally with the way of Jesus. So dying to myself,
Mm-hmm.
becoming more like Jesus. And I love the fact that earlier you said, you read all the dead guys. That's what all these dead guys are going to call us back to.
Yeah.
And this is such an imperative part of especially walking through pain and suffering that we've found. You get to this sticking point in Western American culture, evangelical culture, where it's like, okay, well, join this church and you're going to attend and we're going to have this rock show and you're going to, you're going to serve, you're going to tithe, you're going to do all these different things, right? But then there's this like wall that everybody hits. Many different people have outlined that wall. And it seems to be that it's the spiritual practices that really allow you to get through that wall and then also prepare you for a trial that's going to come. Can you talk about the importance of that? Maybe outline, you said, hey, we really dive into these as groups. What do you mean by that? What does that look like? What does that look like for the individual who's involved in these groups? And how would that actually help, someone who is Mary Sue, who right now is sitting here listening to this and they're going through a difficult time in their life, no matter what it may be. If you're to look at them and say, hey, let's lean into some of these spiritual practices, how is that going to help them?
Yeah. So I think I'm understanding your question to be, why do we need a life of spiritual practice?
Yeah.
And then what does that look like in Bridgetown? And then how does that buoy us through life's unexpected interruptions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. If you can
Yeah.
hit all three of those.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me try. I think I'll attempt to be brief. And then if you want to tug on any threads and go a little further, we can. But
Sounds great.
I would say we need a life of spiritual practice because we know fundamentally that we are not formed just by our thoughts.
Mm.
Like the I think therefore I am approach to life that came from mainly the Enlightenment is just an obvious fallacy. Anyone could tell you that the gap needing to be closed between Mary Sue and the full way of Jesus is probably not resting on just a lack of biblical information or one more sermon series
Mm.
that might compel her to take Jesus more seriously, because inspiration and willpower are both depleting resources. And
Mm.
so to borrow from Dallas Willard, most people um, in every area of their life other than faith fundamentally understand that we're formed by training, not by trying. But when it comes to faith, we attempt to be formed by trying rather than by training. And
Mm.
so the common experience within the everyday American church would be something like, man, you know what? This time's going to be different because I really mean it this time. So I'm going to take it really seriously and try harder. I'm going to try harder to overcome this sin pattern. I'm going to try harder to love my neighbor. I'm going to try harder to root my habits in following Jesus, whatever it may be. And that just perpetuates this cycle of inevitable failure, giving way to guilt, giving way to disillusionment. Is this even possible? Until the pastor preaches an above average sermon again, and then I'm re inspired to try harder. And I
Mm.
just cycle back through that. But instead, if you think about any other craft, if you think about learning to play the violin, wanting to run a 6 minute mile, wanting to bench press your own weight, uh, wanting to be able to make 80% free throws in basketball, whatever it may be, we know like the thing that is standing between me and knowing how to play the violin is not trying harder to
Right.
harmonize the squeaky strings. It is day in and day out practice until I work this art form into me, and then it gives way to incredible freedom.
Mm.
It feels like
Yeah.
discipline at first, but it turns into freedom in the end because the person playing in a symphony on Broadway in New York City tonight, they are not rigidly nervous about harmonizing the violin. They're getting lost in the music.
Yeah.
They're delighting in the craft. And that ultimately is what a life of practice frees you to do, is to enjoy the incredible freedom
Mm.
that this craft affords. The craft we're talking about is practicing the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so if we can live the lifestyle of Jesus, then we can work out, and that'll feel like discipline at first, but it gives way to incredible freedom. And Jesus himself says this, right? In the Sermon on the Mount, he says, the way is narrow, but it leads to life. And so what he seems to be saying is, this is going to be harder for a while,
Mm.
and then it's going to give way to incredible life. It's almost like there's this tiny gate, and it leads along this little narrow path. But then as you start walking it, it just widens and widens and widens until you find yourself in the broadest place that you've ever stood. And I guess that's the way that I think about the way of Jesus. So we need
Wow.
practices because we're formed by training, not by trying. And when I say practices, I'm talking about just the ancient way of the Christian life. I'm talking about specific practices and rhythms of prayer and of silence and community and celebration. I'm talking about work and Sabbath rest. I'm talking about witness, justice, and service. Like, how do we work all of these rhythms, all these imperatives of the way of Jesus into our weekly and monthly schedules so that the thing that most forms me isn't uh, the up and to the right vision of the American dream,
Right.
or my child's travel soccer schedule,
Right.
or the demands of my boss, or whatever they may be for the person listening to this, but where all those things are going to be a part of my life. They're all going to compete for my attention. They're all going to bat me around. But who I'm going to become is increasingly formed into the image of Jesus. So I'm
Mm.
going to put these things in first and then fit everything else around it. And we'll see what fits and
Yeah.
what doesn't. And so that's why we need practices. And then secondly, I would say, how do we do that at Bridgetown? So we have that imperative of Bridgetown community that I was mentioning before. And just the unique thing about Bridgetown community, it's going to be underwhelmingly simple. But when we gather each week, we practice, we come to the Lord's table to begin our Bridgetown community. So we actually take communion in homes. I know that there would be different ways of doing that and different traditions, all of which are wonderful. But that's how we do it. So we take communion and then we break bread together. We always share a meal. And that's simply because Jesus got so much done over meals. And there is something about human relationship where we just connect well around a table sharing food.
Yeah.
And we all know that by experience. And then we move from a meal into a time of practice. So rather than saying, what stuck out to you from the sermon this week? There will be a leader who basically gives like a 3 sentence review of this is what we all heard on Sunday. And that leads us to the practice of blank. And we live into one practice for weeks on end. So an example might be, hey, we're in the midst of a teaching series on uh, being unhurried and at rest in the midst of a stressful and frenzied culture. And so we're practicing that through contemplative prayer or silence. And so we're all attempting to just begin our day with 5 minutes of silence, holding our hands open before the Lord. We practice that together in the group. Like we're all going to do this together. It's guided by a leader so that we don't just describe what it's like, but we actually experience it together. And then we share honestly about the experience in the moment. And then we share about the ongoing experience as we move through the 6 to 8 weeks that we're working that practice. So what is this doing to you? How are you experiencing God through it? How did you think it was going to be awesome that it hasn't been? But the discussion is about the practice rather than the teaching
or sermon. Yeah.
Because the practice is how we get the teaching into our bones and not just our brains. And people who are part of these Bridgetown communities, the assumption is we're not trying to convince you this needs to get into your bones. You're convinced. We're trying to help you get it there. And so that's what these practices are about.
Hey everyone, Davey here. Just want to interrupt this conversation for just a moment and tell you this. Nothing is Wasted is coming to Indianapolis. That's kind of weird to say because that's where we're based and that's where we headquarter. But we will be hosting for the first time the Healing Leader Roundtable this March 2025 in Indianapolis. The Healing Leader Roundtable is a one-day event for pastors, ministry leaders, lay leaders, counselors, therapists, and nonprofit leaders where we dive deeper into how to create environments that are biblically centered, spirit-filled, and trauma-informed. Environments where people can actually heal. Where people can heal inside the church. And this is the church's calling and commission is to help people get healed so they can get back on mission. The thing is, we found ourselves at a critical time in church history. Anxiety, depression, mental unhealth is at an all-time high. And unaddressed pain and trauma has the potential to paralyze the church, the Big C church, and its leaders more than anything else. And the enemy, I'm telling you, is doing everything he can to leverage this against the church. If you're a pastor, how many times have you seen people in your congregation or organization begin to get on mission and move into their purpose, and then something happens in their life and it completely knocks them off course? And so we'd love to invite you, if you're a pastor, a ministry leader, a counselor, a nonprofit leader, or you're a part of the team, or maybe you need to talk to your pastor or your ministry leader about this. We want to invite you to a one-day roundtable event designed to equip you with a holistic approach to healing your organization, all the way from the leadership to the lay people. And if you've ever felt overwhelmed by the pressing needs in your congregation or your organization, the people that you serve, or you felt an emotional toll that it takes on you personally, we'd love to have you join us for this special event. You can find out more information and register for the event at nothingiswasted.com/roundtable. There is an early bird rate going on until the middle of February. So you want to make sure you jump on this quick. nothingiswasted.com/roundtable. If you're not a ministry leader, we'd love your help in getting information about this event to your pastor, to your church leadership. Spread the word that Nothing is Wasted Ministries is bringing the Healing Leader Roundtable to Indianapolis. I know we've got so many of you guys who are listening to the podcast who are Indianapolis folks, and your pastor, your ministry leader needs to be at this event. So talk to them about that. Send them an email, nothingiswasted.com/roundtable, and let them know that they can get more information about that there. And don't delay, because this is a one-day event, and often these reach capacity. And so we want to make sure that you and or your leadership are there. Nothingiswasted.com/roundtable for the Healing Leader Roundtable taking place in Indianapolis, March 2025.
Hey guys, Teresa here. Before we continue this podcast episode, I just want to take a moment and personally share about the incredible opportunity available to you through Nothing is Wasted coaching. Coaching is one of my greatest passions in life, not only because I have the privilege of serving as the coaching director here at Nothing is Wasted, but because I wholeheartedly believe in the process. Getting to come alongside a person in a place of need and help position them on a path of healing is the most rewarding investment that I can make. Our Pain to Purpose coaching and trauma recovery program are both designed to help you face the unimaginable, but not alone. We aren't here to meet you with spiritual platitudes or superficial answers. We're here to help you find meaning inside what cannot be answered. And in doing so, help you take back your story. I have been the witness of some of the greatest triumphs in people's lives as they have learned to navigate painful losses and traumatic experiences, equipped with the right information and support. As a coach and a leader of coaches, I know firsthand the cost and benefit of the healing process, and also the cost of staying stuck. If you are circling your own wilderness of grief and disappointment, let me encourage you to take your next steps alongside us. Don't wait in the wings of your life for things to get better on their own. Time isn't a healer without the proper care of wounds. We are trained to champion you through the most emotionally difficult truths that you will face and see you stand on the other side. If you're worried about fitting your well-being into your own schedule, I want to remind you that a healthier you is a benefit to everybody. Everybody gets better when you do. Your kids, your spouse, those you lead and love. The time to prioritize your healing is now. We've even made coaching more accessible through payment plan options, so the cost doesn't need to be fulfilled up front. Whatever is holding you back, whatever hesitation, let me reassure you, there's no greater step you can take than towards your own well-being for yourself and those who share in your life. If you're ready to take this journey hand in hand with help, head over to nothingiswasted.com/coaching. That's nothingiswasted.com/coaching. The link is also right here for you in the show notes. We are ready and able to facilitate your recovery. It's the joy of our lives to help you rediscover yours.
And how does that help someone in the midst of suffering? Man, I guess the best way I know to talk about that would be from my own life.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed with cancer very unexpectedly about 18 months ago. It was one tumor that got removed, and I was told they got all of it, and I thought I had the cleanest, quickest, easiest cancer journey ever. And there's no one on either side of my family who's ever had cancer of any variety. It was like a total anomaly, but it was like, whoo, got through that. And it was stage 1. So, it wasn't super serious, I guess, as far as cancer in your 30s goes.
Yeah.
But then 6 months later, I had stage 4 cancer that had moved into multiple tumors in my abdomen and attached itself to multiple vital organs. And suddenly I was the youngest patient in a oncology practice, and yet I had the most intense chemotherapy regimen they were giving anyone. And what I would say is so much of the work of prayer, I believe, is trying to attune yourself to the story that God is writing in your life so that you can cooperate with it. So how do I respond to that moment? Am I supposed to, bang against the gates of hell because this is the enemy and Satan is the author of sickness, not God, and so this should be contended against in a like deliver us from the evil one kind of prayer? Or am I supposed to identify with Christ in his suffering and count it all joy when I face trials of many kinds? Because I know that that produces perseverance, character, and character, hope, and hope won't put me to shame. So those are fundamentally different responses and different ways of praying. And I just quoted the Bible in two different ways.
Yeah.
So which one is it for me right now? The only way I know how to do that is if I've cultivated a rich enough communion with God that I know how to slow myself down and say, Spirit of the living God, what story are you authoring? I need to hear you speak to me right now because I've lost the plot I'm living in. And I know how to wait on him and how to hear him speak to me through his word or through his still small whisper or through the medium of other people. But I know how to attune myself to the story that he's writing in my life and then begin to cooperate with it so that in my story, so that what the enemy intends for evil can be for good. Because when it comes to pain, my short take would be that there are two ways that God delivers us. He removes our pain or he redeems our pain. Both are good. And he wins both ways. And I think we just have to know in this instance which one is he inviting me into, because in the life of Jesus there was many times that he removed the pain that others were facing, and there were ways that he redeemed pain most profoundly through the cross. And so I don't know if that's a clear and coherent answer. However, I think I guess apart from a life of practice that gives way to that sort of communion, I honestly can't tell you how I would have lived through the last year of my life. And with a life of practice, I would say that the last year of my life was a lot like the mystery that the spiritual wilderness is. It's like a year that I never want to relive. And I can't imagine who I would be if I hadn't. It was probably the most spiritually transformative year of my life. And if I went back through my life and I could pick a year to relive, it might be my last choice. And I think that's what walking through the wilderness is.
Yeah.
Is it's like something you never want to do again, and yet when you're in the wilderness, the name of the game is like, I'm going to come out of this thing shaped by the wilderness thing, because that's how Jesus came out of his wilderness.
Yeah.
So there's some thoughts.
Wow. Yeah, I think I heard Elizabeth Elliot one time. Well, I didn't hear her say it, but she, read it in something that she wrote, that she wouldn't have asked for this, but she also wouldn't trade it for the world. And living in that paradox is a very peculiar thing. To, as you just said, I would never want to relive this year, but I also am so grateful for what it's produced, achieving this eternal weight of glory, but also like achieving something in you now before glory.
Yeah.
And it's a very sobering thing too, Tyler, even just to hear you talk about it and knowing that you've, knowing I can look in your eyes and see, man, this is a man who's walked through the fire. And I have to imagine that, even as someone who had already been really practicing some of these spiritual practices, spiritual disciplines, who was very well attuned heading into this valley, of being able to go, all right, God, what is this story that you're writing in my life, and how do I align myself with it? I still have to imagine there was some deep deep wrestling where there were instances where you were, maybe in a dissonant way trying to like fight back against what was going on, or struggling with this idea of faith or doubt, and where do the two kind of fall in line, especially as you received this diagnosis and you're going, man, what do I do with this, and what does this mean for me, what does this mean for my family? Can you talk a little bit about that too? Because in the wilderness, I feel like that's often where we wind up being Jacob, wrestling with God as well. What does that look like? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think the way that it looked like for me is I found myself there's kind of chapters to my journey, I guess, as much as I'm able to articulate it now. And I found myself uh, early on praying two different prayers, which were fundamentally at odds with each other, but both came from the Psalms, and so they felt okay to pray to me. They felt like a tension that I could hold.
Yeah.
One was the first prayer that came to me was Psalm 23, which I kind of rephrased as like, God, I'm going to get to live lots of kinds of days, and some will be green pasture days, and some will be valley of the shadow of death days. I can deal with that. What I can't deal with is not knowing your rod and staff that comfort me. So like green pastures, still waters of the valley of the shadow of death, I just want your rod and staff. Give that to me every day.
Wow.
And I can live. And then I would always couch that with Psalm 21, which has this incredible verse about lengthening the days of the king. And the king in this instance is David, who authored both of these prayers. And so I would also pray for length of days, and I would say, God, I can live any kind of days so long as you give me all of my days, because I want to know my children's children. So do not let my days be cut short in the middle of my life. And those I'm aware that was not a like, not my will but your will be done way of praying, but it felt like permission that God was giving me through these two ancient prayers to ask him for what I really wanted, which was, I think, the awareness that suffering can be a place where great treasures are found. And so, God, you don't have to prevent me from suffering. But I want to know the treasure of your presence in the midst of it if I'm going to walk through it. And I know that you want that for me too. And God, what I want from you is just to make sure that my wife isn't called a widow at the end of these treasures that I carry out of this thing. And that my boys don't grow up without their dad. And so that's what it looked like for me early on. And I would say I oscillated between grounded and escapism.
Yeah.
Mainly in my imagination. I would find myself regularly. I knew like there was a variety of timelines toward my recovery, some of which involved never.
Yeah.
But I knew the earliest ones too, and so I would find myself daydreaming about like what it was going to be like when I was better, and what I wanted to do, and how I wanted to celebrate, and and I think that praying those kind of prayers helped me with presence, where I would just come back to, okay, that's a pattern for me that I've grown aware of over time. And when I escape into the future, I'm robbed of the present moment. And so these Psalms are ways of me reattuning and regrounding myself in the day I'm actually living. And then I also experienced a profound turn somewhere in my journey. I read John Donne's devotions throughout, which are prayers that he wrote from his deathbed, or what he thought was his deathbed, when he was pastoring in England during the Black Plague, which wiped out approximately an estimated 50% of Europe's population. And so it certainly seemed like he had the disease. It turned out to be something else, and he lived. But he wrote all these prayers, and there's this one prayer that's kind of the hinge in his journal where he's listening to funeral bells outside, and he starts to imagine they're his own. And he starts to think about the fleeting nature of his days, and in that moment he stops praying and fantasizing about the end of his pain, and he starts asking God for the redemption of his pain. Basically, he stops asking audibly or even thinking about the passing of this cup of suffering, and he starts imagining drinking it alongside Jesus and knowing God so intimately that somehow through the medium of this pain, he experiences more of God in a way that he would never trade for getting to the end of the pain. And that became a real guide for me that kind of, I think, moved me from chapter 1 of daydreaming about escape into chapter 2, where I was just daily praying and memorizing the many Pauline passages in the New Testament where he's saying, I want to know Christ, yes, to know the power of his resurrection, and to identify with him in his suffering. And so somehow attain the resurrection from the dead, which I take to mean, and so somehow know resurrection life right now in this corrupted world. And so, yeah, that was important for me too. I don't know that I'm directly answering your question, but these are some thoughts about maybe the ways that I dealt with the many thoughts that come to you in the prolonged version of hardship that every human being faces in unique ways.
Yeah. Well, whether you're directly answering my question or not, I have no idea, because I'm caught up right now in the profundity of what you're saying. And I mean, I think that's where it's just very evident, as you go through these really deep waters, what the Lord is, what he does in you, and the treasures, as you said, the mysteries that he reveals to you in seasons that he wouldn't otherwise or couldn't otherwise, because you're not attuned to the nature that you are attuned to when you're going through suffering. What do you do when, I know we've got to wrap up here pretty soon, getting close on time, but I'm curious, what do you do when you're you're praying this prayer like, Lord, I don't want to go through, I'll go through this willingly, but I want to have the comfort of your rod and your staff. I want to know and sense your presence. But what do you do when you're walking in that? Maybe you're walking in a really painful season, but you don't know and sense his presence, that it feels absent, like a dark night of the soul kind of thing.
Yeah. I think anyone that's in that spot right now, it's probably difficult to hear anything and find it helpful.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, I think that you wait upon the Lord. I think that that's one of the things that we need spiritual practices that slow us down for as modern day Americans. And I'm like the pot calling the kettle black here. Like, I am from a family of busybodies, and I am the busiest, most active person that I know. That's just my nature. I have an absurd amount of energy that must get out of me every day. And so for me, the most sacred places in my life right now are practices like the 10 minutes of silent prayer that I begin my day with every day, and the Monday and Friday longer rhythms of slowing myself down that I have, so that I might become more measured, and maybe attempt to move through my world at the pace of Jesus, um, because America is very efficient
Yeah.
and rewards efficiency.
Yeah.
And so I'm rewarded in like every area of my life for being productive and efficient.
Right.
But spirituality is not very efficient.
No.
And many of the rewards of spirituality will not be found efficiently. They're relational rewards. And relationships are different than that, right? Like,
Yeah.
relationships are not an up and to the right journey. They're a winding, wandering journey, but the rewards of relationship are so much more extraordinary than anything that can be won by efficiency. And spirituality is like that. Um, and so I think so much of spiritual practice for me has been learning to let God do deep work in me according to his timing, which, there's that incredible line from Peter where he says, God's not slow as some people think of slowness. He
Right.
just doesn't want anyone to perish. And that can be taken in like the most ultimate sense, but I think it could also be understood in more of a present sense, where like, what I would say is over the last year, the things God has wanted to get at in me required some peeling of layers that time was necessary for. I couldn't have a 1 week chemo treatment and him have like stripped me of so much that he needed to strip me of in order to do what he wanted to do in me. One example of that, to try to make this a little bit concrete, would be this. So I'm 36 years old right now. I planted a church when I was 26, but I started pastoring full time when I was 22. So I guess that means, that for the last 15-ish years of my life, the primary way that I've related to God's people has been through my strengths. And has been largely under my control. If you start something when you're 26, that means I've been able to order things around. I've been able to control my life largely since then.
Right.
And if you said, hey, Tyler, does planting a church, does being able to control your life to that degree, and relate to almost everyone that you know deeply through your strengths, is that good or bad for the human soul? I would say, oh, it's not bad. It's an absolute disaster for the human soul, and yet that's the unique story that God's written through in my life. And so, and there's very good things about that. We're told to bring our strengths to the church and bless the church with the gifts that God has given us. But suddenly, I found myself spending 1 week out of every 3 completely debilitated and entirely in the hospital. And I was being visited by people who I was used to being teacher to and shepherd to and strong in front of.
Yeah.
And they were doing things like reading books out loud to me because I couldn't hold my eyes open. And as that was happening to me slowly over a long period of time, I was experiencing life outside of my control. And I was experiencing knowing God's love mediated through God's people in the place of my weakness. And so me, someone who had grown very accustomed to me and God are on a mission together. We're doing this thing. We're preaching this sermon series. We're seeing this come to be in the people. We want to see the city renewed in this way. We had no mission together. I was just stripped naked of every strength that I ever thought I had, lost every shred of control that I ever had an illusion that I had. And he was just washing me with wave after wave after wave of his love at the place of my being. That's something that just can't happen without a long period of waiting. And that's something that I wouldn't have been able to articulate to you while it was happening, right?
Yeah.
And so the person who's in the dark night, quite often, God is actually doing the deepest and most essential thing in you right now.
Wow.
But hindsight is going to reveal it in a way that just the present moment, it's impossible to see because you're waiting upon the Lord.
Wow.
But he's not slow, as some count slowness. He doesn't want any part of you to die, meaning there's not any shred of you that he's content to go unredeemed. And so he is actually willing to allow you to feel like he's taking way too long so that he can do the deepest and most essential work in you. So that's what I mean. Like, if you're in the midst of the dark night, I don't know how helpful that is, but I actually think that's what's happening in you if you're willing to submit to the formative process of waiting upon the Lord
Wow.
in what you're facing.
Wow. Man. Well, despite what you may think, I know that's very encouraging to people who are in the dark night, to be able to say, okay, I can hold on a little bit longer, hold on a little bit longer and let God do his work that he's wanting to do in me. Even if I can't sense it or feel it or see it right now, I can know that he's doing a work in me. So that's so helpful, Tyler. I know you got a jet. I want to make sure that all of our audience, that they can get connected to you. You've got several books. I know you've said that this is a craft that you love to partake in writing. So we'll make sure we put all the links to the different books that you've written: Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools, Searching for Enough, The High Wire Walk Between Doubt and Faith, and then your latest book that's is The Familiar Stranger, Reintroducing the Holy Spirit to Those in Search of an Experiential Spirituality. So we'll make sure we put links there for people can get connected to those very easily. But where can we connect and follow what's going on in your life and what you're doing? I know people are going to want to stay up to speed and pray for you, but also just connect to some of your other teaching and different things that you're putting out there.
Yeah, I have a personal website with, those various things, tylerstaton.com, and the church I lead is called Bridgetown, and the teachings I offer regularly are available there, and our website is bridgetown.church.
Awesome. Well, man, thank you for giving us this time and really ministering to us. I know you said you would never wish to relive that year, but in a strange way, we're really grateful that you have lived that year. You really have been mining for some serious gold and in that process, and you presented that to us today. So just thank you, man. You've ministered to my heart, and I know so many people you've really encouraged. So I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful to get to know you a little bit, Davey. Bless you, my brother.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and found it as encouraging and insightful as we did. Now, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen, and leave us a rating and review. Your feedback helps us to connect to those who need these stories of hope and healing most, and to reach more listeners just like you. Also, subscribe to our Nothing is Wasted Ministries YouTube channel. Now, be sure to stay connected with us on social media. You can follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, follow me at Davey Blackburn, and follow Aubrey at ObSam. We'd love to interact with you, so be sure to stop by and let us know how these conversations are impacting you and your story. And if you want to learn more about all the incredible resources we have available to help you navigate whatever valley you're walking through, visit our website at nothingiswasted.com. If you're ready to get started in your journey towards healing and finding purpose in your pain, we'd love to help. Simply go to nothingiswasted.com/start here for your next step. Lastly, a big thank you to Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We want to thank our guests, and we want to thank you, our Nothing is Wasted community, for tuning in regularly. Remember, no matter what challenges you face, whatever pain you are walking through, nothing is wasted. We'll see you next time for another incredible conversation here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But before you go, check out this short clip from our next episode. Thanks for joining us, friends.
You can choose to understand that as a misadventure or a failure, or in my case, and this is not spinning, I really feel it this way, I see it as an invitation from God to some deeper intimacy with him that I did not know previously existed. And so, and maybe that's how I choose to frame that experience. And I don't feel like I'm doing it to spiritually bypass shame or to bypass, responsibility. I just feel like, oh, now this. So what's the invitation? I think God's invited me to a different level of intimacy. And thankfully, the steps and 12-step recovery communities were there to help me map the territory for that change in that new life.